Sparring, a blank sheet of paper armed with only your creativity and imagination, can be a brutal brawl. That's when I decided to inspire myself on Stranger Things. Great artists steal. They don't do homages. Is it okay to steal from thieves? Would that be the Duffer Brothers, suggesting their creative process is similar to that of a dungeon master? Nah, I wouldn't steal my idea right from the most iconic trap scene of the movies. Or would I? I need not to be oppressed by the blank sheet of paper. After all the stories are already out there. Hello and welcome to the Deep Dice Press. We are a bunch of friends on their 30s who have played D&D since our teen years and who love role-playing and storytelling. In a given day, it just so happened that we were all going through career transitions and thought, why not give a shot on developing D&D products? And that's how our indie D&D publisher was born. Small in size, but big in aspirations. Our purpose is to take our D&D adventures to the magical excitement and deep immersion we experience with the epic tales and narratives of humankind. If you find this content helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click on the bell to receive notifications of new videos with similar content. You can also find the links for our social media on the description down below. How to get rid of creative blocks when building your D&D adventures. Sparring a blank sheet of paper armed only with your own creativity and imagination can be a brutal brawl. That's why I wanted to share where I draw inspiration to homebrew creative D&D adventures. I'll start by sharing what I learned from Stranger Things about creating D&D adventures. The hit series made me confident to do it like Tarantino does and steal great ideas to build D&D adventures. Then, let's talk about how to make your D&D players curious to explore your locations. I'll share with you what I did to find inspiration to build creative towns and villages. Finally, I'm going to speculate how not using this approach may be the very reason why everybody hates traps in D&D. What I did to create challenging and exciting traps in D&D was simply allowing myself to be inspired by the great adventure and action movies. Creative blocks are hard to deal with, and learning how to find an initial source of inspiration was something that made my life much easier, and hopefully it's something worth of sharing. So join us, won't you? Let's start by talking about what I learned from Stranger Things about creating D&D adventures. Once I learned how to do it like Tarantino does and steal ideas to build D&D adventures, I felt that I managed to solve the hardest part of building a story: its beginning. Yeah, I was clearly going through a creative block. We were a few days away from our Thursday night game session. One of our players would be traveling for the next couple of weeks, so we agreed to put his character on the bench and have a side quest adventure in our campaign. That would save our players from the work of creating new characters on one hand, and allow me to leverage the campaign theme and lore to more easily create a short adventure. Sounded like a great idea, but I was wrestling with loose notes and source books, and absolutely no idea for a one-off adventure would come to my mind. That's when I decided to inspire myself on Stranger Things. Not that I would use Vecna or the Demon Gorgon or Mind Flayers. My insight was to use the same approach of the showrunners, the Duffer Brothers. Just like Quentin Tarantino, what they do best is stealing from existing work pieces. The difference is that the Duffer Brothers exclusively steal from what was produced during the 80s. Yes, Tarantino once said, "I steal from every single movie ever made." If my work has anything, it's that I'm taking from this and that and mixing them together. The Duffer Brothers do the exactly same thing. They're not planting Easter eggs here and there, not at all. Like Tarantino also said, great artists steal, they don't do homages. Truth is, both Quentin Tarantino and the Duffer Brothers are not actually stealing. They're getting inspired by the classics. Stranger Things is an original workpiece, but is largely influenced by countless classics. In my opinion, that's one of the main reasons why it's such a success. The Duffer Brothers have literally recycled and reprocessed the 80s pop culture, mixed it all together in a juicer, extracted its pulp, and created on top of that. Through that creative process, they have created something remarkable. The Easter eggs are merely the traces and clues left behind for us to behold what they've built. Truth is, us dungeon masters usually do the very same. We get inspired by books, movies, and series to create our NPCs, encounters, and campaign plots. It's not by chance that Stranger Things begins with the kids playing Dungeons and Dragons in the basement.
Wait a minute. Do you hear that? That sound. Boom. Boom. Ow!
Would that be the Duffer Brothers suggesting their creative process is similar to that of a dungeon master? Anyway, that scene is a clear reference to E.T. the Extraterrestrial, where Elliot and the remaining kids are playing D&D and ask for a sausage and pepperoni pizza. It's not by chance that the Hawkins kids also ask for the same pizza flavor for their game session.
And plenty of sausage and pepperonis.
Hey, Nancy, there's a slice left if you want it. Sausage and pepperoni.
That initial take, in which the main characters are presented to us, is full of references and Easter eggs of classic 80s films. Fact is, the classics are a bottomless fount of inspiration. The Cuban-Italian writer Italo Calvino beautifully defined what a classic is, that a classic is a book that we've already read countless times by the time we read it for the first time. After all, a book only becomes a classic after it has affected our culture in such a remarkable way that we must have already been in touch with that story through other means, such as films, animations, theater plays, or even other books. That's exactly how I felt when I watched Stranger Things for the first time. It seemed that I had already watched all of that before, or that I was already waiting to watch it for years. I was feeling emotive and nostalgic, and no wonder. The series were drinking from the classic movies of the 80s. All the references were right there, and those movies had deeply marked my childhood and teen years. At the same time, I had a clear sense that I was watching something innovative, fresh, and unique. Every time I have a creative block, as a dungeon master, I remember of Stranger Things. I need not to be oppressed by the blank sheet of paper. After all the stories are already out there. Just like the Duffer Brothers, I need only to extract the pulp of those stories that have had an influence in me and build from them. Sure, why not? On that uninspired night, I opened the Wikipedia page for Jules Verne's bibliography. I must say, I have probably read, a couple of his books? But oh, how many adaptations of his stories I've been in touch with in countless medias, from comics to TV series. Journey to the Center of the Earth, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, From the Earth to the Moon, Around the World in 80 Days. 150 years later, his legacy is alive and kicking in the science fiction and fantasy genres. So yes, I started looking through the bibliography, The Lighthouse at the End of the World. That's a cool name. Let's have a look on its plot summary. Wow, dope! I mean, really dope. That could easily become a 2-session adventure. Thursday Night D&D was saved. Of course, I picked and chose some plot points and the ideas started to flow. I mixed in some other stories I liked, added some plots of my own. There we go. Now I had an original adventure full of references from other stories. I recycled and transformed my own cultural baggage in something new creative, and unique. Along the adventure, at some point, I could see my players raising an eyebrow, as if they had seen something similar before. Oh, you have, my dude. You sure have. That's the whole point. Unfortunately, creating great adventures is not all it takes to run great D&D games. Quite often, an exciting town is a central part of a D&D campaign. That's something that would easily become a frustrating experience for me. After all, it takes a lot of time to build, and it may be a bit of a struggle to make your D&D players curious to explore your locations. That's why I wanted to share what I did to find inspiration to build creative towns and villages. How do you homebrew an immersive and unusual D&D town or village? I mean, where do you start? Where do the first ideas come from? Where can you find inspiration to make it a compelling place to be explored by your players? What is it that will make them curious and excited to interact with it? What will make them react in a tongue-in-cheek manner to a whimsical location, or what will make them feel the danger and mystery of a suspenseful place? What will make them point on a map and say, I want to go check what's in there? I'm sure there are many answers to that, and I mean it. Share with us how you build your locations or what entices you about a location in the comments down below. I'd love to read it. Here's my answer to that. I start from the tone and mood I want to set. Right now, I'm creating a village in the heart of a hullock forest of Cormyr, in the Forgotten Realms. Here's the idea. The hullock forest is infamous for its dangers, filled with dark valleys and inhabited by numerous monsters and ghosts. I wanted my village to feel like an oasis to the players. I wanted it to shine bright in contrast with the gloom of the forest. I wanted my players to have the feeling of arriving at an unlikely destination, a magically charming environment filled with mythical creatures. Wherever would I get additional inspiration to build a place like that? Well, I have a personal answer for whenever I'm struggling with my creative process. Stand on shoulder of giants. The great classics of the screen and of the literature are an endless primary source of inspiration for the adventures and campaigns of any dungeon master. As I was thinking about that, it came to my mind where I could find inspiration to build such a location. I recalled the story of castaways that woke up on the sands of a paradise island, the wreckage of their vessel scattered all around. They inexplicably survived the disaster to find themselves in this unknown island. For their surprise, there was no deserted island, and rather the place of uncanny events, monsters, magical creatures, and conspirations. Am I talking about Lost, the hit series that was a phenomenon equivalent to Stranger Things in the beginning of the 2000s? After all, that was its plot, wasn't it? An airplane crashed on an apparently deserted South Pacific island, only for the survivors to find this obscure creature roaming through the jungle. They have to deal with supernatural events and end up coming across mysterious island inhabitants they deemed the others. Soon, they find the island as the stage for a power struggle between its original inhabitants and other groups of visitors.
Stranded on an island. No one's coming for us.
Is that my inspiration? Well, yes and no. I did watch and love Lost, which is still one of the best TV series ever. It propelled to stardom a bunch of exceptionally talented screenwriters, producers, and showrunners, including J.J. Abrams, who by now has created so many brilliant films and series. But virtuosity is a cruel mistress. Recently, J.J. Abrams skyrocketed my expectations, opening the newest Star Wars trilogy with an emotive love letter to the original films, only to make me feel embarrassed with how he closed the trilogy. Just like that, many years before, Abrams created one of the loudest bangs a TV series has ever had in its initial seasons, only to close it with a whimper. I stole that phrase from the movie Tenet. Or did I? Nope, they were the ones who stole it from a poem by T.S. Eliot. Is it okay to steal from thieves? But I mean it. Virtuosity is a cruel mistress, and it does not spare even brilliant creators such as J.J. Abrams. Yeah, I know this is a video about creating locations. Don't worry, I'll get to my point. The inspiration for my location is actually The Tempest by William Shakespeare, which is certainly also one of the sources of inspiration for Lost. The story begins with a shipwreckage caused by a tempest referred in its title. Harold Bloom, maybe the most famous of American literature critics deceased a few years ago, wrote a book called Shakespeare, The Invention of the Human. His argument is that Shakespeare not only represented human nature as we know it today, but actually created that new representation. He believed that every relevant aspect of the modern human were captured by the English playwright work. And truth is, there are so many adaptations of each of his plays. Films, series, animations. You, just like myself, probably has read more Shakespeare from the many of his stories that were retold in other media than properly reading their original source. Just imagine how many amazing ideas and deep reflections we're able to find in such a comprehensive work, which could serve as source of inspiration for our D&D adventures and campaigns. Here's a little example of Shakespeare's influence on literature in literary works. One of the initial phrases of The Tempest, as said by one of its main characters to describe the mythical island inhabitants, is, "O brave new world that has such people in it." That's exactly the phrase that Aldous Huxley took as a name for one of his most famous books, Brave New World. It was also that play that inspired the same Aldous Huxley to write Island, which begins exactly with a shipwreckage that sways the main character to a mysterious island. See? That's exactly the power of a classic. It spreads an idea, which keeps going, engulfing and influencing you, even when you've never made contact with the original work. Here's how the characters in The Tempest describe their island. A maze, trod indeed through forthrights and meanders. The air breathes upon us here most sweetly. Here is everything adventures to life. How lush and lusty the grass looks. How green. The rarity of it is that our garments, being as they were drenched in the sea, hold notwithstanding their freshness and glosses, being rather new-dyed than stained with salt water. One of them proceeds to envision how life would be in the island. No name of magistrate. Letters should not be known. Riches, poverty, and use of service, none. Contract, succession, born, bound of land, tilth, vineyard, none. No use of metal, corn, or wine, or oil. No occupation. All men idle. All. And women too. There, that's the inspiration I needed for my location. I wanted it to reverberate a similar tone and mood that Shakespeare created for his own island. That's how it works, isn't it? You watch or read something here and there, collect inspiration, and try to replicate the magical feeling that an idea, tone, or mood brings up to you. The spell isn't cast. The classic spreads onwards, and you, as a dungeon master, have a new old story to tell. But are those sources of inspiration also useful to build encounters? I believe so, and I think the lack of inspiration is the ultimate reason why everybody hates traps in D&D. What I did to create challenging and exciting traps in D&D was simply allowing myself to rely on great action and adventure movies as source of inspiration. Not long ago, I finally found where to get inspiration to build exciting traps for my D&D players. I've always hated traps in Dungeons & Dragons. Traps are so exciting in adventure and action movies, and yet I find them so dull in D&D. I've had a very hard time to find a good context to use them in a fun way. I've always hated dealing with them as a player, and I've always hated putting them in my adventures as a dungeon master. After all, no GM wants to run something they think the players won't have fun with. By the way, is there something I'm missing? Do you have a fun way of running traps in your game? Hit me on the comments below. I think the reason I've never liked traps in D&D is their super clunky gameplay. I don't want my players to be paranoid about searching for traps in every corner. I also don't like the passive perception approach, in which players either automatically find them or are hit by them. I find both of those approaches a quite boring dynamic for the players, and I think they stall the flow of the adventure. But then I found a way to make traps exciting, challenging, and immersive for my players. Here's how it happened. My players were about to explore the ruins of a temple, and I felt that building a devilish trap would be a great encounter for this type of adventure. But how could I make it really interesting? I started to think about which kind of trap I wanted to build. The concept of complex traps, introduced in Xanatar's Guide to Everything, is a great start. I wanted to get rid of the search and find part for sure. Rather, I wanted my players to run into my trap and deal with the challenge of overcoming it. I wanted them to think of different ideas and strategies to disable it with the clock running against them. Well, a different approach like that is for sure a creative challenge for a dungeon master. I knew what I wanted to achieve with, but where would I find inspiration to build a trap like that? I wanted the thrill, the challenge, and the tension, just like the initial scene of Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. Oh. Nah, I wouldn't steal my idea right from the most iconic trap scene of the movies. Or would I? Well, let me first share with you this mirror story. Steven Spielberg and George Lucas have already admitted that the remarkable opening scene of Raiders of the Lost Ark with the rolling boulder booby trap was inspired by the 1954 Karl Barks' Uncle Scrooge adventure, The Seven Cities of Cibola. Yes, you heard it right. I'm telling you they got their idea from motherfucking DuckTales, or its grandparent at least. Check it out. Donald Duck finds an emerald idol sitting on a pedestal, and Uncle Scrooge is eager to put his hand on it. But Louis, it's clearly Louis, can't you see? Points to the pushrod hook up on the pedestal, which in turn would topple a huge rock if the idol was moved. That's right, Indiana, you're alright for a treasure hunter, but you gotta pay your respects to Uncle Scrooge. Lucas and Spielberg mentioned that Barks' stories about aliens and space travels had a big influence on them. George Lucas even wrote the foreword to a comic classic called Uncle Scrooge McDuck, His Life and Times. He called Barks' stories cinematic and a priceless part of our literary heritage. And boy, they were. I was 6 years old when I learned to read on a diet of endless Disney comics reprints. Many of them were adventures by Karl Barks, and they blew my mind in a way that would shape my entire life. I can trace back all my interest for history, literature, science and art to reading his stories. Barks' stories transformed me into a curious kid. They made me imaginative. They taught me the power of creativity. Through Karl Barks' works, I was in touch in a very early age with amazing myths and legends. Through his works, I was blown away by sea monsters. I learned about the myth of Atlantis. I first heard of Shangri-La. I made my first journey to the center of the earth. Karl Barks stole the uncanny stories of James Hilton and Jules Verne. the myths and legends of old, and transform them in his own stories that would fire up the imagination of young kids like myself, or like George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. I can only imagine how many times this very same cultural rolling boulder has manifested in many, many different pop culture stories. So yes, I damn well would steal that scene to create my own encounter, but I would do that tongue-in-cheek. Here's my trap design. It's a fiery hallway of kobold zipline bombarding squad. Once the last party character entered this descending hallway from its uppermost door, it would close behind them and trigger a huge tin of tar that would start to go down the hall. The following round, the tar would be set ablaze. Every round, kobolds wearing aviator goggles and leather flying helmets would go down a zipline attached to the roof, carrying filled buckets they would use to bombard intruders with their content. Which content? Well, roll a d10 and pick one. From grease and chicken feathers, to skunks and electric eels, to snapping lobsters, each one of them with different saves and consequences. Why do I think such a trap works so well? Because it urges the characters to make a decision. Should they run from the fire tar and take the damage from the kobolds? Should they try to break the zip line and risk being caught by the fiery tar? There was also a pit halfway through the hall, which could be used to collect the tar, but it was closed and there were 2 levers. Should the characters then try to figure out how to open it? Whichever decision they would make, and all of them were valid approaches, they would have different challenges that would require either physical prowess or good thinking, and they would have to do that against the clock. I really think it's the kind of encounter where it's all there. The flavor, the challenge, the player agency, the surprise, and the tension. It's fun to run, and players feel so accomplished to overcome it. It feels like an adventure movie or a comic book. So thanks for that, Master Callworks. And thanks for that, Masters Lucas and Spielberg. Tomb Raiders. We talked about a lot of things, so let's try to wrap it up. I'm certainly biased, but I believe that running an outstanding session of Dungeons & Dragons is one of the most exciting things a group of friends can do for fun. I guess that the reason for that is that role-playing games are one of the few types of entertainment that mix 2 things humankind has done for millennia: playing games and telling stories. It doesn't take much to run a fun D&D adventure, but running an outstanding D&D adventure can be sometimes a real challenge. Why? Because great storytelling is hard. So what can we learn from such hit shows as Stranger Things to make our life easier? Truth is, storytelling is a game of repetition. Stealing from classic stories, be them young classics such as Stranger Things or old ones, such as William Shakespeare's plays, is not only something that us Dungeons Masters do or should do. It's at the very heart of storytelling, and I can show you. Sparring, a blank sheet of paper armed with only your creativity and imagination, can be a brutal brawl. There's no shame of arming yourself with classic stories, mixing and blending and expanding and parodying to the point where something new is created. That is true for all that surrounds a D&D campaign. Its adventures, its locations, and even its encounters. I have created adventures looking for inspiration on the plot of The Lighthouse at the End of the World by Jules Verne. I've created locations based on the mythical Prosperous Island from the play The Tempest by Shakespeare. I've created encounters based on the most iconic boob trap scene of the history of the cinema, the rolling boulder from Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. The beauty of inspiration is that it's a starting point, not an end by itself. You can grasp the essence of your source of inspiration, such as the thrill and the tension of the rolling boulder trap from Indiana Jones, to build something new considering its key elements: a mix of intellectual and physical challenge with different ways to tackle it, but with the urge of doing so on a limited set of time. The same goes for locations. An awe-inspiring scenery, along with an amusing tone and mood that I can steal from fictitious settings, may be the key to jumpstart my creativity. But why classics are such a powerful inspiration? There are a couple of reasons for that. Harold Bloom, a late American literature critic, claims that Shakespeare has created the way that modern humans are represented in stories. That, on itself, would be enough to value classic stories like those written by Shakespeare. But it goes beyond that. Cuban-Italian writer Italo Calvino defines a classic as a story that we've read countless times by the time we read it for the first time. How? Through the countless times it has inspired other stories that have already reached us. Would that be true? Few movies and series have made such a powerful statement about that like Stranger Things. For our own delight, Stranger Things brings strong references to our beloved game. There is no coincidence. The approach that Stranger Things uses to build its plot is very similar to how several DMs do it. Stranger Things has over 90% of appreciation by critics and audience alike. A very, very rare recognition. And one of the main reasons for that is that they steal all the greatest stories from the 80s and retell them, all stitched together and shaped into a clever and original blockbuster. Just like Quentin Tarantino once said, great artists steal, they don't do homages. As we trace back Stranger Things' genealogy, that becomes quite clear. The first episodes of Season 1 have many references from E.T., a movie by Steven Spielberg. Spielberg, along with George Lucas, are the creators of Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, whose opening scene is directly inspired by an Uncle Scrooge McDuck comic book by Karl Barks. The stories by Karl Barks were an ode to imagination that have profoundly marked my youth. He would recycle the greatest stories to strike in awe young kids like myself, drinking from imaginative plots such as Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne and Lost Horizons by James Hilton. Before making Indiana Jones, George Lucas created the universe of Star Wars in the 70s, to whom The Force Awakens by J.J. Abrams sends a splendid love letter. Before directing a Star Wars movie, Abrams created the hit series Lost in the early 2000s, a phenomenon on its own. Its plot of castaways in a paradise island is a direct reference to The Tempest, a play by William Shakespeare that inspired not one, but two books by Aldous Huxley, Brave New World and Island. The history of storytelling looks much more like a family tree than a history per se, where great stories give birth to other great stories. If such a host of powerhouses can be connected among themselves as source of inspiration for one another, why should I, a low-level dungeon master, not do the same? No, not I. I shall stand on shoulder of giants, for such an allegiance will help me survive through the cold edges of the unmerciful blank sheets of paper. If you're interested in the content of this video and would like to know more about it, click on the link on the description below to download for free our booklet Make Your Character Matter. You can also find more related content in our social networks. All links are available in the description below. If you want to check out a module where we apply all concepts discussed in this channel, look out for our new campaign, The Kingdom of Cormyr, One Purple Raven, available next year. Clicking on this screen, you may find more videos on how to create exciting D&D adventures and characters. If you think our content might be interesting for you, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and click the bell to receive notifications for new content. This video makes part of our series on how to create great D&D campaigns. In this series, we discuss what we believe to be the core elements of an outstanding D&D campaign for players who enjoy role-playing and storytelling. great characters, and great stories. In the Great Characters videos, we talk about the importance of backstories, allies, bringing the party together, and how to connect all of that into an outstanding D&D campaign. In the Great Stories videos, we discuss such topics as building up tension and suspense, plot lines, plot twists, villains and patrons, as well as advanced storytelling techniques. And yet, the best way to create great adventures is getting inspiration from great ideas. So be sure to share your great ideas and experiences in the comments down below. What was the best source of inspiration you've ever used for a D&D adventure? I'm sure your experience will inspire not only us, but many others. Thank you for sharing this moment with us. We are the Deep Dice Press.